Hi, I'm Myron Goldfinger, architect, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Modernism Week in Palm Springs, California. Every February, they have a week-long architecture and design festival, which actually lasts 11 days, and U.S. Modernist Radio is there, interviewing nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers, plus special guests. It all happens at the U.S. Modernist Compound, aka Poolside, at the hip Hotel Skylark. If you are into mid-century modern, Modernism Week is a joyous festival of mid-century architecture, insightful lectures, plentiful martinis, shopping, nonprofit benefit events, architecture documentary premieres, eye-popping house parties, brilliantly curated house tours, detailed art and architecture exhibits, and so much more. I'm Tom Guild. When we head to Modernism Week, George and I pack our nicest party wear of all kinds, because you never know if it's going to be 80 degrees or if it's going to snow. Both things happen this year, although usually Palm Springs' reputation for great weather is well-earned. Even if you get it wrong, there's always Trina Turk or Mr. Turk down the street for last-minute clothes shopping. And at every party, there was one guy who always had on the best shoes, so much so people stopped him to take photos. That would be George Smart.
Thank you, Tom. It really was this year like I was Dorothy with the ruby slippers. So let me tell you the story about how I got these shoes. A couple of years ago, I ordered a cordless drill off Amazon. Very routine purchase.
Yeah.
And then about a month later, I got a note from Amazon, one of those notes that says, "Hey, George, if you like this cordless drill, you would really love these shoes."
No.
And they showed these sort of sequined rhinestone red shoes with beautiful stylings and this big silver cap on the end where the toe was, almost like a cowboy boot, a rhinestone red cowboy boot. And I just thought to myself, Amazon, your algorithm really knows me. And I bought it right away. Boom. And I wear these shoes around Palm Springs for parties, and they're just showstoppers.
Now, maybe if you brought the cordless drill with you,
Yes.
somehow the combination of the two would be even more incredible.
Incredible is the operative word there,
Right.
I think. I don't think that would really...
Or people might try to grab you for handyman jobs.
If you're into mid-century modernism, Modernism Week is the Super Bowl of all the architecture that we love. It's really incredible. And this year in 2022, everyone who attended was just so happy to be there. I mean, happy to be anywhere, really. Coming out of COVID and the pandemic and having to stay in our houses and not be with people, it was just a real celebration of not just all things architecture, but just being with other people. Really wonderful. If you'd like to go with me and Tom to Modernism Week in February 2023 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist Compound, email me at george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In our ongoing mythology, modernist realtor Angela Roll dated Harry Potter at the age of 17 while she attended Le Corbusier High School just down the road from Hogwarts. They never played each other in soccer, but their proms were legendary, particularly the year they did Stairway to Heaven. Although ridiculed by architecture students for dating a magician, she learned how to conjure up the slightly tipsy ghost of Mies van der Rohe and aced all the exams. She even became class valedictorian. Now she's one of the few real estate agents with formal architecture training, giving practical advice to buyers and sellers, plus she knows what wizards like to eat. Angela Roll is your magic spell for modernism. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or call 919-995-0550. In California, everybody thinks of Los Angeles and Palm Springs for modernist architecture. But Bakersfield? Monterey? Past podcast guest Pierluigi Serraino is an architect and author originally from Sicily. After graduating from the University of Rome, he moved to California and studied at SciArc and UCLA. He then worked for SOM before opening his own practice in 2009. Serraino's prolific books on modernism, especially the classic Modernism Rediscovered, built a resurgence in mid-century modern fans. And like any good Italian, he talks with his hands, so we always bring a pair of gloves so Pierluigi doesn't hit the mic. Later on, reading from his latest novel, Death by Design at Alcatraz, architect Anthony Poon. But first, our conversation about Monterey modernism with Pierluigi Serraino.
Not many things endure, but one book I read, now 22 years ago, Modernism Rediscovered, by our guest today, endures forever. It is often the entry drug for modernism. Once people find this little piece of hallucinogenic...
It's a book, right?
Yeah, it's a book. Yes, it is a book. Yes,
It's a book with a hook.
Yeah, it's a book with a hook.
Oh, good.
Great, I love that. They just don't go back, and his book really contributed to some of this renaissance in so many aspects of modernism. Pierluigi, thanks for coming back and being on the show.
Always a pleasure to enjoy this weather and the company of you guys.
In that order.
Yeah. Now, you're here for Modernism Week to talk about an area of the country that hasn't gotten much attention for modernism, even though everybody kind of knows there's something there. Where is that?
Today I will be talking about modernism in the Monterey Bay.
Which, if you didn't go to geography class, is where?
I love this program. It is south of San Francisco, south of Santa Cruz, about 110 miles south of San Francisco. So It's within driving reach, 2 hours, 2.5 hours.
To San Francisco than it is to LA.
No question.
Yeah.
So for those of you who remember proportions, that's the only thing I can remember, is that Palm Springs stands to Los Angeles like Monterey stands to the Bay Area.
Okay, a couple hours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they have the same function. It's an outlet toward a more remote area because, even Sea Ranch, it takes a lot more commitment in terms of driving. It's 4 hours. And progressively, a number of giants settled there. Some settled there for the rest of their career. Some stationed there for a while, and some contributed to the heritage.
These were giant architects?
Giant architects. I'm talking about, for example...
I didn't know if these were just really tall people.
also, I believe there are tall people as well. But for example, Gordon Drake was in the Monterey Bay in Carmel. He set up his office after leaving Los Angeles. He was there for a couple of years. He even tried to set up an architecture school. And he left a few buildings there, and then he moved to San Francisco, and he passed on very early on. There are characters like Henry Hill that settled there after having had a glorious practice in San Francisco and contributed to the heritage of the area. There were people that came from the experience of Taliesin. The most prominent one is Mark Mills, that after apprenticing with Frank Lloyd Wright, he told me he was kicked out because I met him by Wright because Wright thought him and Solari were moonlighting. So they did the Dome House, which is the famous house in Arizona that was published. Then he moved to San Francisco, worked for Anshin and Allen for 6 months doing Eichler Homes, and then he moved to Carmel. And he did extraordinary work, of which I'm going to talk about. And then there are one-offs like Pierre Koenig, did his only steel frame in Northern California. And he did it and he restored it after he found it. Desecrated and in tears saw it, what was happening. When you try to domesticate a steel frame and vernacularize, so to speak, it's complicated. There are all sorts of monstrosities that take place. So in essence, it's starting to expand the places, the geography of this legacy. And a major contributor, as always, is Frank Lloyd Wright. Because Wright designed a few houses that were not built, but they were almost a preparation for the house that got built, which is the Walker House. on the actual beach. It's the only house that is on the beach of Carmel. And he did it for essentially a member of the Walker family, the Walker Museum in Minneapolis, our center, who are patrons of architecture, have always been patrons of architecture. And the house is still in family hands, a third generation, kept in impeccable shape, a profoundly transformational space with the gardens of Thomas Church. This legacy has yet to be accounted in some form of appraisal. In a way, Modernism Rediscovered pointed to a gap that was perceived as minimal, but it actually was ginormous. The Stoller book reinforced that. I extended this to other areas, and it's the same pattern. There is no doubt that Chicago has extraordinary work that is yet to be covered. The whole Detroit area, Minnesota. Louisiana has a tremendous mid-century modern. We just don't know. Yeah, you wouldn't think. All you have to do is find the archives of the architectural photographers of the time that were in associations. And as you know, as a photographer, not everything that you document gets published. And it doesn't get published because it's not good, because of the politics of the publication, because the owners don't want to get published, because it doesn't fit that particular issue of that magazine. And
right.
I mean, there are all sorts of
things that have nothing to do with the quality of the work.
Exactly.
Right.
And when you cumulatively over time, you have Modernism Rediscovered, which is exciting. But at the same time,
it's like
frightening.
The B-side.
But at the same time, it's frightening because then you have the situations like the Geller House, where, in essence, this heritage is not really fully understood and appreciated from a real estate perspective, which is really what the aspect. You have to create an economy around these houses to be rescued from being bulldozed.
Well, let's back up to Monterey
Please.
just a little bit, Pierluigi. Monterey is also known in the public eye the last 50 years as being this kind of new age center where you could go and hang out in this very modern architecture and sit in the hot tub and do yoga and find yourself. And that was part of the culture, too, of the architecture at the time.
It is a bit of a mixed bag because you have a powerful culture of photography. Edward Weston lived there. Brett Weston was there. Ansel Adams was there as well. Morley Bear moved down there and had a house designed by Worcester. So the site truly commands your attention, just like the desert here has something spiritual. The coastline overwhelms you with its beauty. And the architecture is an ongoing conversation with the magnitude of the bigness of that nature. If you have an iota of feelings, you cannot not respond to. So nature, in this way, becomes, as Wright said, the big teacher of architecture. And so there are many versions of the organic, because there's also a strand of Bruskov people that moved there. There's some work of significant standing by Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill within the hardcore modernist tradition. At the time when all this work was happening, the great architecture historian, the first architecture historian in the United States that was trained as an architecture historian, James Ackerman, was teaching at Berkeley between 52 and 59 and was writing for the Architectural Review. So he was chronicling all this, and I had the good fortune to speak with him before he passed on. That's the common denominator of this research. You have access to primary sources as they are still alive, but the clock is ticking. So there's a frantic element of how you extract the information that is meaningful for the preservation of their work, not just to aggrandize them as individuals, but to really appreciate the fullness of the thought behind it. Architecture requires common resources at a scale that is much bigger than one person. And the addictive aspect of mid-century modern is precisely the coalescing of all these energies all together behind a notion of design that which was very varied and expansive and profoundly impactful up until the late 1960s.
Right.
And you know that, I mean, we all arrive at the same milestones from different paths, but it's clear that the attention shifts from design to politics, to fashion, to music, and architecture just falls into the wayside, and the environmental crisis and all that. So we are bathing ourselves into the golden age, of which Monterey contributed in. And I'm talking in Monterey, I'm including Carmel, Big Sur, the whole stretch of coast. I mean, it's hard to say Santa Cruz is there as well, but we could as a bigger area.
The region of
the region, exactly. Yeah. So it's significant, and there is no book that tells the story. I'm not working on that book, but
why not?
Because I have other projects lined up.
I think there needs to be Modernism Rediscovered Part 2.
I've been thinking about that because...
You could go to Louisiana and some of these places you mentioned earlier.
Oh, well, yes. You're thinking about not Modernism Rediscovered concerning Schulman, but just...
in general.
I think it would be... massive. I
on the road with Pierluigi.
Yes. Oh well, I invite everybody. It's just because it's really spectacular.
Get your convertible.
The work is, and you guys in your area have some spectacular stuff.
We do have a few things.
So
yes.
I don't see the same level of excellence today. I just have to be. I understand that now. I mean, I see that the canon is being absorbed, but there are other concerns that are compounding and are just weighing on the architect. I saw, for example, the number of drawings that were necessary to do the Ludekind's house by Jack Hilmer, which was one of the great houses of the 20th century. There were 32 sheets, which was substantial for the time. But the Brubeck house was only 7 sheets of drawings.
The Brubeck house was Thorn?
It was Thorn, exactly.
Okay.
And it was the house where Take 5 was
right.
Was
we just
composed.
had his son, Darius, on the show.
Right.
Talking about
great.
the Thorn houses both on the West Coast and on the East
fabulous.
Coast.
Yeah.
And the Brubeck Archive is at the University of Stockton, and they have hundreds of photographs of them in the house playing. And so the house really became a vehicle for that kind of forward thinking.
That was a 7-sheet house.
7, exactly.
So is
I
that
imagine
that's a small number of,
You can barely show a feasibility study if you're lucky. I mean, any new construction today would require hundreds of sheets between consultations.
Wow.
So it
was a kinder, simpler time, Tom.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
And at the same time,
men were men, and they just kind of winged it.
That is also one of the reasons why it's so much qualitatively convenient to restore a mid-century modern home. That you have a new home. Yeah. It's just like you have a guaranteed result that at least that kind of architecture thinking will be preserved and you will inherently enjoy it.
Well, let me ask you about 2 houses in that area. The first one is a house by Neutra on Pebble Beach that has been controversial for, I guess, 10 years now.
Yeah.
Because somebody bought it and wanted to tear it down and was prevented from doing so. And it's just been left there to founder. Has anything happened with that house?
No. I have intermittent knowledge of this. I do know that there was a project by Legoretta for the house.
A new
design and all that. And then my understanding is that the owner left the house decay, so to speak, so that it will lose its preservation status. I do know that this is an ongoing contention, but in a way it's a textbook of how you deal with private properties for a piece of this heritage. I mean, in essence, that owner should have never bought this property in the first place because it comes with a lot of strings attached. And it's not that there are not other lots available. I mean, everything is within reach with money,
right?
Even in that area. So it's an ongoing battle. And you see the same factions coming up in various hearings for different situations. So it's still, in a sense, still from the best of my knowledge.
So it hasn't changed.
It hasn't
recently.
changed.
It's in flux.
I mean, it's still there, but it's
in pretty bad shape.
Yeah. I mean, but as you know, with architecture, you can redeem the ruin into its full glory. I mean, everything is reversible,
right?
In essence, because many of these restoration houses, even like the Hunt House by Elwood.
Yes.
I mean, the design is that, but they have to change virtually every single building component in it. So there's nothing original of that, but the house is exactly the way it looks.
Right. Right. You can bring it back.
And I feel that this is a legitimate operation
Yeah.
in the end because, having an Eames piece, whether it was vintage or redone, doesn't change the nature of the design intent imbued into that project.
Yeah.
As long as you don't have two McConnell houses by Neutra, which would be a problem, obviously.
Now, the other house I want to ask you about, and I'm trying to remember the name of the architect, you'll know. There's a house near that famous bridge on Highway 1 that is on like 7 acres on a cliff overlooking the bridge and overlooking the bluff.
Does it have a triangular section by any chance?
Yeah.
That house, I'm going to be talking about that house, is called the Wild Bird.
Okay.
And it was designed for Nat Owings, the founder of Skidmore, Owings and Nat Merritt, by Mark Mills. I saw the house when it was sold about maybe 15 years ago. I was able to get in. And the remodeling did not seem to be sympathetic to the house, but the house is still there. I spoke with Mark Mills about that house. Mark Mills, who designed the house, and often the house is credited to Nat Owings. Nat Owings was an exceptional entrepreneur and businessman, but he was not a designer by his own admission. But the huge egos and 4 martini lunches prevented to give proper credit to Mark Mills, who was close friends with the wife of Nat Owings. And Mark Mills had envisioned a completely different design for that site. But Nat Owings had been in the house that Mark Mills had designed for his parents. And he said, in no uncertain time, I want this house on that cliff. And so he had to redo it. And he wasn't happy, but it's a beautiful piece of architecture. And Stoller took extraordinary photographs, which I'm going to show in this. So it is there. It's essentially an A-frame that has a missing base because it shifts. The A-frame requires a firm base, but in fact it cantilevers on one side. And it's really
Is it earthquake safe?
Yeah.
Any house on a cliff in California.
Yeah, but it's been there for quite some time. And so
how long ago?
62, I believe it was designed, so it's been around. But I do not believe it's landmarked because, it requires the owners to go through the process.
Who owns it now? Do you know?
The last time I heard about it was someone from the UK, some investment banker that had it. But then I don't know if it was a change of owner. It is a known house. I mean, people in the area know about it, but it's not you cannot visit it. And that's always the challenge of...
Can you see it?
You can see from Nepenthe, this restaurant that Rowan Maiden, who was a Taliesin fellow, designed. I invite you guys to go for a long weekend and just peruse because I'm happy to give a number of critical addresses, so to speak, and some key people that can open some doors. But you will see that there's a thick sort of heritage in it that is totally mind-blowing. And certainly I would include this phenomenal steel frame by Pierre Koenig that was restored to its full glory by himself. And I have to say, it's always remarkable when the same architect goes back and looks at the house again.
Oh, this is the one that he went back to and it was...
Yeah, and it was literally butchered, but it started to butcher a steel frame. The steel is going to be there. So the owners understood that something was happening in the house. From the back of the house, they saw the floor-to-ceiling glass, the sliders, and the architectural expression that was not what the house was showing from the outside. So on the outside, they put wood siding, they put a pitched roof, they do all sorts of things to mitigate that. And the new owners, great patrons of architecture, she's an interior designer, he's an investment banker, really restored the house to its full beauty and even extended its beauty. They hired Peter Walker to do the gardens. And then Schulman, who had never photographed the house, came to the site with Jürgen Nogai and did an amazing assignment, responded to it. So it's really a beautiful story.
The Atkinson House by Gregory Ain was on the market a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really kind of under the radar. It didn't get the kind of national publicity that I would expect a house of that immense beauty to have gotten. Do you know if it ever changed hands?
No, I do not. But you're pointing out to something that is critical, which is, as opposed to Los Angeles and even Palm Springs, that at this point has understood the market potential of these properties as long as they are kept intact and ideally restored to the best of their potential. The rest of California has proved to be disorganized in leveraging that. Even San Francisco, where there is no shortage of funds and availability of money, the way these houses are marketed is inconsistent with a sense of continuity. Either the realtors do not understand how to position this legacy from an artistic standpoint, or they're just photographed very poorly, or both. You cannot photograph these houses like you would photograph a hotel, skewing all things and making them bigger than they really are. There's a certain serenity about these houses, and sometimes a certain heroism. But the one thing that I can tell you is that the relationship with the landscape is one of the fundamentals of this legacy. It's not just the building. And the challenge of our perception of these buildings is that we tend to appreciate the elevations more than their site conditions. But with Instagram, what I learned is that before I arrive to the building, often I am overwhelmed by the site, but the geometry of the trees, the topography, the changes of level, how I get from the public way to the threshold, that big space is half of the longevity of mid-century modern to me. And in fact, in the earlier architectural guides, you would see these gardens that were recommended as places to visit. You don't see that any longer in architecture guides.
They're not accessible?
Well, they're just not listed as such.
Oh.
You would have suggestions to see a garden by Garrett Ekbo as a standalone piece within an architectural guide, which is not something that you would see in later years. But in fact, the strength of those design propositions is, to a large extent, the way they are cited. So, for example, in the case of the Walker House, the gardens are by Thomas Church, who is a real giant within the field. Many of these buildings had the gardens of Larry Alperin, another giant. Berkeley had its own department of landscape architecture, which was really important, as well as Harvard. And so Harvard and Berkeley are the two major originators of thinking for the outdoors. But the outdoors, not just planting, it's really outdoor architecture to the full extent.
Right.
So that means the pools, like every single aspect
landscaping,
outside of the building enclosure.
The whole experience.
Which is really the whole experience. I want to reiterate this point that photography has shaped our perception to aggrandize the building at the expense of the landscape. And therefore, the budget that's given to landscape architects is always insufficient compared to the design purpose. So it's always an afterthought. But these buildings came together. That is the beauty of it. I mean, in the end, Neutra was a landscape architect and an architect. And it shows. It shows. There's a grace in the way the buildings are sited. And I would say, for example, even for the case of Thorne wanted to leave the site undisturbed as much as possible. So all this architecture of stills still allowed for the site to come in its full force.
Sure. Is there a Monterey Bay Modernism group active in the area?
There are some active folks, and I would be happy to put you in touch with them. There is not a Docomomo chapter in.
Is there any kind of organization?
There are not in a formal way.
Okay.
Not in a formal, but there are local historians that have been very active. Part of it would be to be more organized in collecting this legacy and making it more visible. At this stage, it's still kind of a volunteering effort, but it's increasing in percentage of efforts. So
there is a Monterey Bay Modernism blog.
Yeah.
But it looks like its last entry was 2018.
Oh. Who wrote it?
Well,
that is the fate of many blogs.
Yes.
It doesn't say.
Yeah.
Hang on. Actually, it does say the Monterey Bay Modernism blog was started by Cynthia Reeby.
Yes. Cynthia
Bernard
Reeby.
Trainer.
Yes.
to honor Gerald Lomax, an architect.
Yeah, Gerald Lomax was the designer associated with
And Karen Lesney
Yeah.
was one of the founders.
Yes.
And if you want to know more about Monterey Bay Modernism,
Yeah.
you can contact Karen at mobaymod,
Yeah.
MOBAYMOD,
Yes.
at gmail.com.
Yes, that is correct. And there's also an archive that has been curated by two local historians. One of them is Rick Janik, who trained with David Geppert. But I cannot remember I'm having a blank, although I know them both well. And they are sort of the veterans of collecting this heritage. And they knew personally Morley Bear. I've seen their archives. It's quite phenomenal. How many holdings they have? The issue is, again, we need to have a more structured
so there's a
setting.
memory and knowledge.
Exactly.
Just hasn't been organized.
So I've leaned on their knowledge as well, leveraging my visibility to just give them visibility because they deserve it. And so in this respect, I've been advocating for Modernism Week to have an edition in Monterey during the summertime, precisely to start enjoying this as part of the larger network of California contributions to mid-century modern at large.
Well, Pierluigi, I know your talk went well, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
George and I were talking with author Pierluigi Serraino.
Bakersfield, California businessman and arts patron David Coffey is originally from Cincinnati and is founder of Modern Office Environments. He owns the Richard Neutra designed Davis House in Bakersfield and was the curator of Frank Lloyd Wright's Abelin House in Bakersfield. He's on the board of the Society of Architectural Historians Southern California chapter, and he's into Crosley cars, which you may not have heard of. And now we go poolside at the U.S. Modernist compound. My conversation on Bakersfield with David Coffey. David, it's so great to meet you in person because we've talked so much on the phone and corresponded back and forth all this time. Before we get into the architecture, I want to ask you about Crosley cars. What are these?
Crosley cars were the brainchild of a guy named Pal Crosley, who I like to think of as the Elon Musk of his day. He was a car parts manufacturer until the 20s when his son, he had a young son that fell in love with the medium of radio. And he was bugging his dad to buy a radio. I want a radio. And he looked at these things and said, this is $100, which at the time was about $1,000.
Yeah.
So he said, well, let me have one. We'll buy one of these things and we'll reverse engineer it. And he figured he could make it for $25 and make a healthy profit. So he started making radios.
That's right. They're Crosley radios.
So I have a 37 that's the same year as my Neutra and a 52 that's like a Swiss cheese model.
I have some friends who collect vintage radios.
Yeah. So it was a big brand. So he then from there decided, well, you know what? To sell these things, I need to promote them. So I need a radio station. So he bought WLW in Cincinnati, pumped up the broadcast frequency, and it would go all the way to
pumped up the power.
The power, excuse me. And went all the way to England and all the way to California from Cincinnati.
Yep.
And I thought that was a wives'
At
tale.
night on the Skywave.
Exactly. So I was selling, my first job in LA, I was selling postcards at the Chinese Theater. I was the manager of the gift shop there. And this couple came in from England. They said, no one's from LA. Where are you from? And I said, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. And they looked at each other and they got misty-eyed. And they both said, WLW radio from Cincinnati, Ohio. And I said, how do you know that? And they said, well, we used to drive from London down to Brighton, sit on the coast, and on a clear night we could hear broadcasts. So he was this visionary. He was the first guy to put lights on a baseball stadium because he bought the Cincinnati Reds. And the first illuminated game was because of Pal Crosley. He made refrigerators. There are shelves on the doors of your refrigerators thanks to Pal Crosley. It was called a shelvador.
And he said he had a knack for coining things.
Yeah, absolutely. So he did that, but his burning desire was always to do his own car. So in 1939, he created a small sedan. It had to be 47 inches wide so it could fit through the front doors at Macy's because that was his number one distributor. Because he was selling it to places that he had sold his radios.
So you would buy it inside the Macy's and then drive it out the front door and drive it home?
You could.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was the first guy to do an overhead cam in the United States that were adjusted with shims rather than mechanically adjusted. and first car from the United States that had disc brakes. So we produced them. They weren't really much. I mean, they were kind of like in the same vein as a refrigerator. But the idea was it was sort of a second car that would get 50 miles to the gallon, and you could fit 4 adults into it. And he produced them till 1952. So I do have a Crossley car. I like anything that's design driven. So motorcycles, scooters, cars.
You said it got 50
art.
miles a gallon?
Yeah, in
Yeah.
1952 they were getting 50
And how
miles a
wide
gallon.
was it?
47 inches.
How wide's your Mini, George?
I'm not sure, but I think it's wider than that.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's way wider. I have a
Yeah,
Mini
this-
Cooper S, and I have a picture of my Mini Cooper sitting next to my dwarfed.
And it looks like a Hummer.
Yeah.
So
Crossley.
why didn't this catch on?
No one cared about gas. Was 19 cents a gallon.
That's right.
Nobody cared. Everybody wanted horsepower, baby. You know. So
Okay.
It just
The
didn't-
Mustang kind of
yeah,
era.
Exactly. Well, 50s. So you would still have had. But
Thunderbird.
everybody had a V8, and you needed a car to go 70 miles an hour across the country. Not these little city cars.
Little city cars.
Yeah. So that's Crossley. That's
So after your career at Chinese Theater,
yes.
and after playing around with these Crossley cars, when did you first buy your first Modernist house?
In 2003.
Okay.
So I was living in Los Angeles. I'd worked for a company that owned a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Michigan. And part of my job responsibility was to fill up the company jet and fly people to go see the factory. But we would have dinner in this Frank Lloyd Wright house. And I loved that experience dearly. Experiencing, really world-class architecture. I lived in a neighborhood in Long Beach that Ed Killingsworth lived in, the Modernist. And so I was familiar with his work. But I really fell in love with Neutra at MoCA, the MoCA retrospective in 1989, I believe, by Elizabeth Smith. And they actually...
We've had her on the show, yeah.
So they had the case study program.
And that's where they did the full-scale recreations?
Exactly.
Okay. The
Exactly.
Stahl House was there.
Yeah. So I could
that's
put,
right, yeah,
I could really
full
put
size.
names with ideas and concepts and the feeling of that. And so I love that architecture, but never thought, that wasn't. I was a guy from Ohio. That wasn't for me because I could never afford it. So I missed a few houses, one in a Neutra house in particular, that I was too late and $50,000 short or something.
Yeah.
And I was working for Steelcase. I was working on a project in Bakersfield for an oil company's headquarters, and thought, you know what, maybe there's some Neutras here. So I pulled out the big book, found that there were 3 houses there, and I thought, I don't need to be in LA anymore. I'm not in entertainment, And it's close enough. I'm an hour and a half away. I still go to LA every week for work. So it worked out that way. I bought the Neutra house in 2003 from a really great guy who had it since '59. He was a Swiss architect who had studied with Mies van der Rohe and all the guys, and had a real deep relationship with Neutra, and was a prince to me and sold it to me. So
And what condition was it in when you got it?
fantastic.
Fantastic.
I felt like I bought the Porsche in the barn because it's in Bakersfield, so there's not a lot of people that were aware of it. He actually had sold it the day that I met him. He had sold it the day before. And that was my whole reason to move to Bakersfield. But I'd been told that he would never sell and that not even approach him. So after I composed myself, I said, well, not to be indelicate, but how much was it? And he told me how much it was, and I was really upset because it was the price of a garage in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So I could have afforded it. Because I was thinking, if it was $2 million, I couldn't even afford it. So don't get upset.
Yeah.
But when he told me how much it was, I really got upset. That was the depths of depression.
Oh.
And he said, well, you got to come over and see it before I take out the Mies van der Rohe dining room table and the Corbusier lounge and the this.
Oh.
So then I'm really in despair. But I didn't. I went over, and he was a prince, and he let me walk through the house. And he hadn't lived in it in a while. He lived in another home. But structurally and everything, it was fantastic. The finishes were the only thing that needed to be done and to bring it back. So long story short, on the 60th day of a 60-day escrow, he called me out of the blue and said, do you want the house? And I said, what house? And he said, the Neutra. And I said, you sold that months ago. And he said, no, we were supposed to close the day at 5 o'clock, and the son of a bitch backed out at 4:30.
Oh, no.
And
Wow.
I gave you my word. You get first crack. So I got it from him.
Talk about
and
a
then-
prince of a man.
Oh, he was totally of his word. And then it got even better. So then I was in escrow, was waiting for it to close. I had contacted Craig Kroll's gallery, who represented Julius Schulman, and found that there were a lot of images. There were 11 images that Julius had printed. And so I said to Frank, look, I want to thank you for selling me this house. I'm going to give you a Julius Schulman image so you'll always have a great picture. And he said, no, don't do that. Just do something nice for the house. So he kept saying that, and I kept insisting. And he said, look, if it doesn't cost anything and it's no trouble, I'll take the picture.
Yeah.
And I said, no, it's $5,000, but it's worth it to me. And he said, come to think of it, I got some of those pictures laying around at my new house in Santa Barbara, but don't bug me, I'll get them to you.
Yeah.
So a week later, I was at his office working on a project, not with him directly, but with his firm. And the receptionist gave me a manila envelope and said, this is what Mr. Getze has for you. I waited. I went down to my car. I was sitting in my Mini Cooper right before Christmas, and I opened this, and it was 7 vintage prints from 1937.
Oh, wow.
Of my house.
Oh, Merry
It's
Christmas.
just amazing. And he was such a prince. So I had him agree that he would come back and visit me once I lived in it. And he paid me the ultimate compliment. He said, it's more Neutra than when I lived here.
Oh,
Is he still around?
He is. Frank is he's in his early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I had him come, when we did the 60s in Bakersfield, we had him come back and speak on a panel. And I told him, there was a room of 350 people, and I said, all of these people are here because you sold me your house.
Yeah.
And he feels like it went to the right guy. So.
Well, then the hits keep on coming because
The
you get
hits keep on
associated
coming.
with the Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Yes. So having the Neutra house opened up a lot of doors for me. And, probably on a monthly basis, somebody will call or somebody will be standing in front of the house. And so a really nice guy called me out of the blue, introduced himself as a mutual friend of an art dealer in Los Angeles, and said he was coming up to Bakersfield and would like to see the Neutra. And I said, sure. And let me know when you're coming. He said, well, I'm coming up on a certain date, but I'm going to be coming up more frequently because I bought a house. And I said, really, what house did you buy? And he said, the Frank Lloyd Wright house. So he came up, we had coffee at my place, and you show me yours, I'll show you mine. And we started a friendship. And that was in 2006, I believe. And then in 2009, he's a very busy guy. He's a very benevolent guy and generous and loves the house, but it's just too busy to really spend much time there.
Yeah.
He said, I don't get up there that frequently. Would you do me a favor? I know you share your Neutra with other people. Would you just take the Frank Lloyd Wright house and do the same for it? We stay on top of the maintenance, and I'll, send me the bills. So that was 2009. So someone would call and say, I'd like to see the Frank Lloyd Wright house, or there'd be a scholar coming around, or a scholar would call from LA and say, hey, this guy's in from Germany, and he'd like to see a Frank Lloyd Wright house. We can't get him in anything in Los Angeles. Could he come up and see your place? And he can see 2 Neutras and a Frank Lloyd Wright with one swoop really easily. So
Yeah.
There's another Neutra in Bakersfield as well that was built in 57. So that's how all that started with the Frank Lloyd Wright house. And then in 2019, I had a conversation with him. He was thinking of selling the home. And I had a tour group come through. And there was a young couple who are still friends today. And I met them at that point. And they said that they had been to 32 Frank Lloyd Wright houses that year. They had lost their lease in Los Angeles. They were writers. And so they had just been driving across the country. And I said, so what do you think of
they
this?
spending a night in Frank Lloyd Wright houses?
No,
or-
they were just going to visiting.
Okay.
Yeah, like just paying their $10 or whatever and, going and taking a tour. And it got me thinking, the house was on the market and I was helping the guy prepare it to sell. And I thought, it would just be, they said, well, what they told me was there's nothing like this in the United States in Frank Lloyd Wright's work. And I said, why is that? And they said, it has never been restored. It doesn't need to be restored. It's in beautiful shape. Only one owner. And it's unique. One of the only 60 houses where the textiles, the furniture, and the house were all done by Wright. So it's a fully realized Wright project.
Wow.
But the really key thing is that it's only been one family. The mother and father owned the home. When they died, it went to their heirs, but the children didn't live in it. So usually, it gets passed down to somebody and they live in it or they sell it. So none of that's happened. So I approached the current owner, and I said, there's some really great things that are happening. This couple came through and they told me this, it'd be a shame if the wrong person bought it and made changes or messed it up, or people wouldn't have access to it. They wouldn't be as generous as you are to share it with the community. But at the same time, the UNESCO World Heritage sites there were 8 Wright buildings that were put on the UNESCO World Heritage Site. This was in the fall of 2019. And I'd known Jeffrey Herr at the Hollyhock House and great work that he had done. And so I thought, you know what, this is bigger than just Bakersfield. Being UNESCO World Heritage Site status elevated all of this. So I relayed all of this to the owner. So I said, what would you think if you slowed down the process of selling the house? I'll raise the money, buy the house, put it into a foundation. We'll have a corpus to take care of it in perpetuity. And he said, that's what needs to happen with the house. And you're going to do it. You're the right guy to do it. And let's do that. But why don't I give you the house? So he gifted me the house into the foundation to create the Bakersfield Built Foundation with the idea that it'll be, we'll have it open regular hours, say it's, one Saturday a month or something. And then eventually put my Neutra into the same foundation. So Bakersfield will have an early Neutra and a late period Wright, along with a lot of regionalist guys there. So
that's fantastic what you've done. I mean, you've really curated a whole collection.
It's not standalone. There's been a lot of great people that have helped me along the way to figure this out and how to do it and all that sort of stuff. And then I as I had mentioned earlier, I also have a really charming little office building that was done in '56. That's a mid-century dental and orthodontist office that I operate my business out of, by a Berkeley graduate architect who's still alive in his mid-90s. He had written a textbook on drafting, so he's a really notable guy.
Okay.
And so it all works together, and it's, it's fun. So
now, when is your next Bakersfield Built event that people can go to?
So the next Bakersfield Built event will be in 2024. We're going to feature the 50s. This will be the 4th one. The first one was just the 2 Neutras in the Wright. We had 65 people show up. 64 were from LA or Santa Barbara. There was one brave soul from Bakersfield. And then we did something on the 30s to coincide with the 75th anniversary of the Grapes of Wrath. Mm-hmm. And we had 85 people show up for that. We had 20 people from Bakersfield, so we're getting better. And then in 2019, we did the 60s. And I think the 60s draw a bigger crowd in general.
Yeah.
But we had a standing room only symposium at Bakersfield Museum of Art. We're about 350 people, and 60% of them were from Bakersfield.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we're moving the needle.
Right.
Yeah.
With the idea that we have a lot of great architecture that's untouched. Because Bakersfield is sort of an island. As close as we are to Los Angeles, it's still separated by 100 miles and a big mountain range. So we've operated as an island, and people have taken care of these places pretty well. So, and it's a very dry climate, which helps us,
Sure.
for things to weather.
America's food basket, right?
America's food basket. Every table grape, every pistachio, every almond, every carrot you eat come from Bakersfield. The baby carrots, invented right there in
Bakersfield baby carrots.
Bakersfield baby carrots, along with homegrown Merle Haggard.
Okay.
And emigre Buck Owens were from the Bakersfield.
And did the California raisins, weren't they from?
They were not. I think
Okay.
that they. That's Fresno, right up the valley. Yeah, so we've got that, and then Gregory Porter and Korn, the two.
Korn.
The music group.
Oh, Korn the band.
Korn, the band. Korn the band.
Okay.
This is a really mind-blowing. So Jonathan Davies, the lead singer from Korn, graduated from Highland High School in 1989. In the same class was a jazz vocalist named Gregory Porter. And Gregory Porter is the #1 jazz vocalist in the world now.
Yeah.
He's the reason that Don Was kept Blue Note Records going.
Ah.
And they were in the same high school class.
That's so funny.
In Bakersfield.
You just don't look like a kind of guy that would know much about corn. But
well, my partner went to high school with him.
okay.
And there's actually, I don't know if it's
Neither do
Corn
I.
Alley or Corn Row, and it's in the Corn script in
Okay.
Bakersfield near the.
We need to get Gregory Porter on the show on our jazz portion.
Yeah.
Well, Gregory Porter is a big fan of architecture. If you look at his album from 2020,
All Rise?
All Rise.
Yeah.
So that album came out in 2020. He has a degree in planning from San Diego State University and loves architecture. And there you go, All Rise.
Okay.
So you can actually see him in a video at the Frank Lloyd Wright House.
Oh, okay. I'll have to watch that later.
And a great guy who's become a friend. He would be interested in talking about.
So it's a cultural mecca.
Well, it's for a town of 400,000 that has a reputation for being really hard scrabble and blue collar.
Yeah.
It is an interesting place. The other owner of
It's punching above its weight.
Way above its weight. Yeah. I mean, Ernest Kump, who was a modernist architect who went to Berkeley and then studied under Walter Gropius at Harvard, was from Bakersfield, and came back to Bakersfield and set up a practice, did some fine buildings there before he ultimately went to Fresno. He was fantastic. Whitney Bigger was a local architect who was fantastic. He was Berkeley as well. But then there was a guy named Clarence Cullermore who was a high school teacher who came to Bakersfield in 1910. He went to Berkeley and had a degree in architecture, came to teach a mechanical drafting class in Bakersfield, but within 2 years was teaching architecture classes. And at the high point, they had 9 classrooms devoted to architectural drafting.
Really?
And for your junior and senior years in high school, you spent 3 hours doing architectural study. He had a handshake with USC that his star students he sort of had a pipeline to get them into the USC
So it was like a farm team.
It was exactly a farm team.
I'm full of the sports metaphors.
There you are. You're pulling them in.
Yeah.
The agriculture. We need to get some oil pumped into that.
I think it started with corn.
There you
it
go.
started with corn.
Well, at one point, there were more SC-trained architects in Bakersfield than any other place outside of Los Angeles.
Wow.
So he was there from 1910 till 1960. He taught at the high school until, I think, 56. So there is a deep history there of this stuff. And culturally, the owner of the other Neutra house, she danced with Martha Graham in the 40s. She was filmed for, Imogene Cunningham took pictures of her at Mills College in 1948 for Life magazine. And she's had a fabulous life in New York and then moved back to Bakersfield and started a family and had the Neutra house built. And she's still alive. She's 93.
Well, David, what's the website?
I don't have a website. You can find us on Instagram. At Bakersfield Built.
Bakersfield Built, okay.
Or at David A. Coffey.
Well, this is fascinating. You were doing a great job
thanks.
in Bakersfield and just in that whole region.
Yeah.
And I should just point out that coffee is not spelled like the beverage.
Correct. Coffey.
Yeah.
Right. And Fresno is coming on, too. I have colleagues in Fresno that are on fire about the modernism that's there.
Okay.
There's great stuff.
I was talking about the butt of a few jokes, Fresno.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the twins, Bakersfield, Fresno. I mean, we referred to Bakersfield as one of those echo cities because when you say, I'll be in L.A. or down here doing something, well, where do you live? And I say Bakersfield. They say, Bakersfield?
Oh, okay. That kind of echo.
That's the kind of echo city, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I like to say since we got running water indoors, hot and cold, and electricity, and there's no holding us back now. It's nice. You got to try it.
Yeah. Got our first McDonald's.
That's right. No, I mean it's a really great community. The people, I love living there. I mean, people come from everywhere, and no one has said, I don't understand why you're here.
Well, obviously, with this kind of pedigree.
It's really been great, and the community's been really welcoming. I love Bakersfield.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
That was George talking with David Coffey. There are thousands of architecture books, but you just don't see many novels about architecture, even novels with an architect as a main character. That's why we were so excited to read Anthony Poon's new novel, Death by Design, at Alcatraz. In San Francisco, architects are being murdered as they compete for a new museum of art on Alcatraz Island. LA Weekly said the book is The Fountainhead Meets Squid Game. Here's a sample. The author, architect Anthony Poon, reading from Death by Design and Alcatraz.
Prologue. The Architect Who Couldn't Fly. 6 a.m. and delivered from a red-eye flight, the Dutch architect eyes his construction site blanketed in the cold veil of San Francisco coastal fog. Here and there, through openings in the swirling heavy mist, Lars van Meester glimpses his latest architectural design in progress on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The cloak of fog has not burned off quite yet, leaving Lars to discern construction progress as best he can. He stumbles a bit around piles of debris, stacks of steel beams, and coils of electrical wires. Any clear view of half-completed structures only alludes to the haunting and skeletal quality of a building shell being erected, awaiting a soul to come. Despite years of comfortably gliding through construction sites, from balancing on the I-beams of office towers to navigating machinery and underground labyrinths, Lars finds himself hesitant as the morning light fails to earn its way through the haze. He feels the menace of the ghostly white pea soup and, having read the news on the plane, also feels the unwelcome of the community for his new lifestyle center. Local residents were calling it yet another project of consumerism and poor taste captured in brick and mortar. Lars' arms are full. One hand is attempting to take photographs, documenting the fieldwork, which is a valiant but wasteful effort in these murky conditions. Under the other arm are several rolls of drawings, blueprints, as they were once called, for the chemical process using a blue ferric ferrocyanide compound, resulting in the trademark and romanticized prints of the past. The Dutch architect sees the shapes of a few first-arriving construction workers gathering at a coffee wagon in the distance, beyond the arms and legs of copper pipes, galvanized ductwork, and rebar. For balance in taking photographs, Lars places the rolls of drawings against the construction site fencing running intermittently across the rock boundary of the site near the cliff. A fresh breeze comes up, and satisfied with his photographs, he reaches for his drawings. They aren't there at first grasp. He reaches out further and further, like a blind man desperately looking for a cane that has fallen to the ground. He gets on one knee, his three-quarter black jacket tails grazing debris and rock. He finds one roll and feels around for the other, which can't be far. His cell phone buzzes. Perturbed and disoriented, he stands up to reach for his pocket while he takes a few steps in the gloom, peering for the other roll of drawings. Lars' bulky black boot meets a flat but slick rock, and his practiced balance and vanity is gone. He stumbles a bit and moments later realizes this Dutchman doesn't know how to fly. Lars van Meester falls 20 stories to his death at the base of the rocky cliffs, where he is united with the rows of drawings he was so anxious to retrieve. The city's signature fog has finally lifted. The construction pace is in full force as concrete foundations are being poured, as trusses are being lifted in place, as welders weld. The sounds of construction reach a harmonic vibration resonating with the rhythm of progress. Work goes on.
That was architect Anthony Poon reading an excerpt from his new novel, Death by Design at Alcatraz.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. And by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in 2023 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist Compound? Email me, george@usmodernist.org. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researched all the guests for our Modernism Week interviews. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Gild. George and I'll be back soon with another sitting by the pool, looking at the mountains, drinking martinis, talking architecture edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
It's a tough job, but we're going to do it.